I'm 56 years old, and for the past 25 years, I've been listening to something singing beneath the North Atlantic that shouldn't exist. Not whales, not equipment resonance, not auditory hallucinations from isolation or pressure sickness. Mermaids, real ones, living in the depths below Platform 17, 187 miles off the coast of Scotland, in waters that drop to 1,240 feet. And 11 days ago, the singing stopped. That same night, 14 men vanished from the rig without a trace. My name is Thomas Garrett. I'm a senior systems engineer for Pelagic Offshore Energy, or I was, before all this happened. I've worked on deepwater oil platforms for 31 years, Gulf of Mexico, North Sea, offshore Brazil. I've published 3 papers on subsea acoustic monitoring systems. I hold 2 patents related to drilling platform structural integrity assessment. I'm telling you this not to brag, but so you understand, I'm not some superstitious roughneck. I'm a scientist. I trust data. I trust measurements. I trust what can be proven, which is why I spent the first 2 years trying to convince myself the singing was nitrogen narcosis, even though I heard it at surface pressure. Why I spent another year blaming it on equipment harmonics, even after I'd eliminated every mechanical source. Why I've spent the last 22 years documenting something I knew would destroy my credibility if I ever reported it. I'm telling this now because I need people to know what's down there before someone else goes missing, before another platform gets built over their territory, before we push too far into waters we don't understand and something pushes back. This is my testimony. This is exactly what happened. I won't ask you to believe it. I'm just going to tell you the truth. I started on Platform 17 in March 1999. It was my 3rd North Sea posting, and I was glad for it. My divorce had finalized 6 months earlier, and I needed distance from Chicago, from lawyers, from the empty house I'd bought thinking I'd have kids to fill it. The rig work suited me. 28 days on, 28 days off. Isolated. Structured. The kind of place where you could lose yourself in routine and problem solving, where personal history didn't matter, only competence. Platform 17 was a fixed-leg installation built in 1987 during the North Sea boom. 8 legs anchored to the seabed at 1,240 feet, supporting a platform roughly the size of 2 football fields. At capacity, we housed 180 personnel, roughnecks, engineers, medics, galley staff, management. My job was monitoring structural integrity and subsea acoustics. We had hydrophones positioned at various depths to detect everything from equipment malfunction to unauthorized submarine activity. I spent most of my time in a small office reviewing spectrograms, analyzing frequency patterns, writing reports nobody read. The work was technical, solitary, exactly what I needed. The platform sat above the Faroe-Shetland Channel, where Atlantic water meets Arctic currents. The biodiversity there is extraordinary. Pilot whales, orcas, basking sharks, countless fish species. My hydrophones picked up marine life constantly. You learn to recognize the signatures. Sperm whale clicks, humpback songs during migration, the chittering of dolphins. I'd cataloged hundreds of hours of recordings. Published a paper on using acoustic monitoring to track cetacean populations near offshore infrastructure. So when I first heard the singing on April 22nd, 1999, I thought I knew what it was. It was 11:47 p.m. I was alone in my office, reviewing the day's acoustic data before bed. Night shift meant skeleton crew, maybe 40 personnel total, most asleep or monitoring automated systems. The rig hummed with its usual sounds, generators, pumps, the constant low-frequency drone of machinery. Through my headphones, the ocean was alive. Shrimp clicks, the groan of thermal expansion in the rig's legs. Distant ship engines. And then something else, a vocalization. Low frequency, around 180 hertz, sustained for approximately 12 seconds, then stopping. I marked it, thinking, pilot whale. But the harmonic structure was wrong. Too complex. Too structured. It came again. Same frequency, but modulated differently. Rising and falling in a pattern that felt deliberate, almost melodic. I isolated the recording, filtered out background noise, played it back at half speed. It sounded like singing, not whale song. I'd heard enough of that to know the difference. This was something else. The phrasing was too precise, the intervals too controlled. It reminded me of Gregorian chant, if Gregorian chant had been performed underwater by something with vocal anatomy nothing like human. I sat there for 20 minutes, replaying the recording, trying to identify the source. The hydrophone that captured it was positioned at 890 feet, about 350 feet above the seabed. The sound wasn't coming from the surface. It was coming from deep water, from the darkness below the thermocline where light doesn't penetrate. I checked equipment diagnostics. All systems functioning normally. No mechanical resonance, no interference. The recording was clean. I logged it as unidentified biological, made a note to research similar vocalizations, and went to bed thinking about it. Curious, but not alarmed. The ocean is full of sounds we don't understand yet. Every year, marine biologists discover new species, new behaviors. This was probably just something I hadn't encountered before. I didn't think about mermaids. Not then. Not until I heard it again the next night. And the night after that. And the night after that. The singing became a nightly occurrence. Always between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Always from the same general depth range, 800 to 900 feet. Always with that same haunting, structured quality that made my skin crawl even as it fascinated me. I started staying up specifically to listen for it. I put on my headphones around 10:45, pull up the real-time hydrophone feed, and wait. The anticipation became ritualistic. I told myself I was being scientific, documenting an unknown phenomenon. But the truth was simpler. I was captivated. The vocalizations varied night to night. Sometimes they were solo performances, a single voice rising and falling through complex melodic patterns. Other nights, I'd hear multiple voices, harmonizing in ways that shouldn't have been possible for marine mammals. The frequency ranges overlapped but remained distinct, suggesting individual singers with different vocal ranges. I spent 3 weeks trying to match the sounds to known species. I consulted databases of marine mammal vocalizations. I reached out to colleagues at Aberdeen University's Marine Biology Department, sending them anonymized clips and asking if they recognized the source. Nobody could identify it definitively. The consensus was probably an unusual whale vocalization or possibly equipment artifact. But I knew it wasn't either of those things. On May 17, 1999, I did something I shouldn't have done. I went diving. It was against protocol. Personal recreational diving near active drilling operations was strictly forbidden. Liability issues, safety concerns, the risk of interfering with subsea equipment. But I had my POTI certification, my own gear, and 28 days of accumulated curiosity burning a hole in my rational thinking. I waited until 2 a.m. on a calm night when the rig was operating at minimal capacity. I suited up in the equipment storage area, slipped into the water from the service platform at the northwest corner where security cameras didn't cover, and descended into darkness. The North Atlantic in May is cold even at the surface, around 48 degrees Fahrenheit. At depth, it drops into the low 40s. My dry suit kept me functional, but I felt the cold pressing against me, seeping into my bones. I carried a single flashlight, keeping the beam pointed down, not wanting to attract attention from above. I wasn't planning to go deep, maybe 60 feet, just far enough to get below the surface noise and hear the ocean directly. Just far enough to see if there was anything visible near the rig's legs. The visibility was poor, maybe 15 feet. My light illuminated swirling particles, plankton, sediment, organic matter suspended in the water column. The rig's legs disappeared into blackness below me. Massive steel pillars covered in barnacles and kelp. Small fish darted in and out of my light beam. A jellyfish pulsed past, translucent and ghostly. At 45 feet, I stopped and turned off my flashlight. The darkness was absolute. The kind of darkness that makes you forget which direction is up. I floated there, neutrally buoyant, listening to my own breathing through the regulator and the distant mechanical hum of the rig transmitted through the water. And then I heard it, not through hydrophones this time, directly. the sound traveling through water and bone, resonating in my chest cavity, unmistakable and immediate. Singing. It was coming from below me, deeper than I could see, deeper than I could safely dive. Multiple voices, harmonizing in patterns that made my breath catch. The sound was beautiful and wrong at the same time. Too structured for animals, too inhuman for people. I hung there in the darkness, listening as my rational mind tried and failed to explain what I was hearing. The singing continued for approximately 4 minutes. Then it stopped, abruptly, as if the performers had been interrupted. The silence that followed felt expectant, waiting. I turned my light back on and saw something move at the edge of the beam. Not a fish, not a seal, something large, darting away with a powerful tail stroke, disappearing into the darkness before I could track it. Just a glimpse, pale shapes, movement that suggested a body plan I didn't recognize, a flash of what might have been long hair or kelp or something else entirely. My heart was hammering. I checked my depth gauge, 52 feet, still shallow enough to be safe, but suddenly I felt exposed, vulnerable. I had the overwhelming sense of being watched from the darkness beyond my light's reach. I ascended immediately, probably faster than I should have, not bothering with a safety stop. I surfaced near the rig's service platform, climbed out, stripped off my gear with shaking hands, and returned to my quarters without seeing anyone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my bunk, staring at the wall, trying to process what I'd heard and seen. My training screamed at me to report this. Potential marine life near drilling operations could have environmental implications, safety implications. But report what exactly? That I'd violated protocol to go diving and heard singing and maybe saw something I couldn't identify? I'd sound insane. So I said nothing. But I kept listening. Over the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed with the hydrophone feeds. I started recording every instance of the singing, building a library of vocalizations. I analyzed the spectrograms, looking for patterns. I measured frequency ranges, duration, intervals between vocalizations. I approached it like a scientific problem, because that's what I knew how to do. What I found disturbed me. The singing wasn't random. It followed patterns, temporal patterns, frequency patterns, even what appeared to be syntactic structures. There were recurring motifs, phrases that repeated with variations, like verses in a song. Different voices had different ranges and timbres, suggesting individuals I started mentally labeling as Singer 1, Singer 2, Singer 3. More concerning, the singing correlated with our drilling operations. When drilling was active, the singing occurred nightly. When drilling stopped for maintenance or equipment changes, the singing decreased in frequency or ceased entirely. When we hit certain geological formations, particularly the sandstone layer at 4,200 feet below the seabed, the singing became more intense, sometimes continuing for hours. It was as if they were responding to what we were doing. On June 3rd, I made a decision that would define the next 25 years of my life. I went diving again, this time with an underwater camera. Same protocol, 2 a.m., calm conditions alone. But this time I brought a full-spectrum camera capable of recording in near-total darkness, and I went deeper, 80 feet, pushing the recreational limit, descending along the rig's northwest leg into water that got progressively colder and darker. The singing started at 78 feet. I could hear it clearly through my regulator, vibrating through my ribcage. I turned on the camera, pointed it into the darkness below, and waited. For several minutes, nothing, just the singing growing louder, closer. My light showed only empty water and drifting particles. And then they appeared. 3 of them, rising from the deeper water, staying just at the edge of my camera's effective range, maybe 25 feet away. The image quality was poor, grainy and dark, but I could see enough. Humanoid torsos, arms ending in webbed hands, long hair, or something like hair, flowing behind them, and where legs should have been, tails. Powerful, muscular tails covered in scales that caught my light and reflected it back in colors that didn't quite make sense, iridescent, shifting like oil on water. Their faces were turned toward me. I couldn't make out details at that distance, but I could see the general structure, too large, too angular, eyes positioned slightly too far apart. Not human. but not entirely alien either. One of them raised a hand, not threatening, just acknowledging. The gesture of someone who knew they'd been seen. The singing stopped. They watched me for perhaps 30 seconds, treading water effortlessly. Then, in perfect synchronization, they turned and descended, disappearing into the darkness with powerful tail strokes that propelled them downward faster than any human swimmer. I surfaced in a state of shock that bordered on dissociation. I had 14 minutes of footage. Most of it was unusable, too dark, too grainy, the subjects too distant. But there were a few frames, maybe 3 seconds total, where the figures were clear enough to be undeniable. I watched that footage 47 times over the next 3 days. I had proof. Imperfect, ambiguous proof, but proof nonetheless. I had recordings of the singing. I had video showing something in the water that defied conventional explanation. I had 25 years of training and experience in marine systems telling me this was impossible, and I had my own eyes telling me I'd seen it. I spent a week in internal debate. The scientist in me wanted to report this immediately. Contact marine biology departments, send the footage to experts, document one of the most significant discoveries in human history. The pragmatist in me knew exactly what would happen if I did. My credibility would be destroyed. The footage was too ambiguous. It would be dismissed as hoax or misidentification. I'd be labeled a crank, lose my job, become a cautionary tale about isolation and North Sea paranoia. And something else stopped me too. The way that mermaid, because that's what they were, I had to accept it. The way she'd raised her hand. Not aggressive, not fleeing, just acknowledging. The gesture had felt like a warning and a request at the same time. You see us. Please don't tell anyone else. So I didn't. I kept the footage on an encrypted drive. I continued monitoring the hydrophones. I documented everything in journals I kept locked in my personal safe. And I went back to my regular job, analyzing structural integrity and acoustic data, filing reports, maintaining equipment. But at night I listened, and they sang. By August 1999, I'd established what I thought of as a functional protocol. I treated the mermaids, and I'd come to accept that term, for lack of a better one, as an ongoing research subject. I couldn't study them openly, couldn't collaborate with colleagues, couldn't publish findings. But I could observe, document, learn. I upgraded my personal recording equipment, purchasing better hydrophones with my own money, installing them discreetly alongside the official company systems. I bought underwater cameras with better low-light capabilities, additional hard drives for storing footage, more sophisticated audio analysis software. Over the course of 6 months, I spent roughly $8,000 building a private research infrastructure that existed in the gaps of Platform 17's official operations. I became meticulous about documentation. Every instance of singing was logged with precise timestamps, duration, frequency analysis, correlation with rig activities, weather conditions, moon phase. I maintained detailed journals written in code, abbreviations and technical jargon that would look like standard engineering notes to anyone who might find them, but which actually tracked mermaid behavioral patterns. The cover story was easy. I was passionate about marine mammal conservation, conducting independent research in my spare time. My colleagues thought it was a harmless eccentricity. Command didn't care as long as it didn't interfere with my official duties. And it didn't. I was good at my job. Possibly too good. My obsessive attention to acoustic monitoring caught structural issues before they became critical, identified equipment failures early, maintained safety records that kept me employed and minimally supervised. The singing continued nightly throughout that first summer and into autumn. I learned to distinguish individual voices, not just singer 1, 2, and 3, but eventually recognizing 8 distinct vocal signatures. I started to identify patterns in who sang, when, which voices harmonized together, how the group dynamics shifted. What emerged was evidence of a community. They weren't solitary creatures. They were social, organized, possibly even cultural. The singing had structure that suggested language, music, or both. There were what appeared to be group performances, all voices joining in complex harmonies. There were solo segments that might have been storytelling or teaching, There were call and response patterns between individuals that looked remarkably like conversation. I went diving 7 more times that first year, always at night, always alone, documenting what I could. I never got closer than 25 feet. They maintained that distance consistently, as if we'd mutually agreed on a safe boundary. But I observed population, at least 8 individuals regularly present, possibly more in deeper waters beyond my diving range. Habitat, primarily between 800 to 1,000 feet depth, though they range shallower at night. Behavior, hunting at depth, squid and fish, social interaction near the rig's legs, what appeared to be territorial patrolling. Intelligence, problem-solving behavior, tool use. I once filmed one using a rock to crack open a shell, coordinated group hunting. Every observation raised more questions. Where did they come from? Were there other populations elsewhere? How long had they been here? Did they migrate? Or was this a permanent territory? What did they think of the rig invading their waters? By December 1999, I'd accepted several uncomfortable truths. Mermaids were real, living beneath Platform 17. They were intelligent, possibly as intelligent as humans, perhaps more. They'd been here longer than the rig had. Reporting their existence would almost certainly lead to their capture, study, exploitation, or destruction. I was choosing to keep them secret. That last point weighed on me. I told myself I was protecting them, but I also recognized the arrogance in that position. I was making decisions about their fate without their consent or input. I was, in effect, playing God, deciding that humanity wasn't ready to know about them, that the risk of exposure outweighed the potential benefits of discovery. But I'd seen what humanity did to whales, dolphins, great apes, species we claim to value and protect, yet still hunted, captured, studied invasively. What would we do to mermaids? Creatures that looked disturbingly human, that demonstrated intelligence and culture, that lived in waters we wanted to exploit for resources. I knew what we'd do, so I kept the secret. The first year became the second year. My 28-day rotations on the rig became the rhythm of my life. 28 days living with a secret, monitoring the singing, diving when conditions allowed, documenting everything. Then 28 days onshore in Aberdeen, analyzing data, organizing files, living a surface life that felt increasingly hollow and disconnected. I stopped dating, stopped maintaining friendships beyond surface-level collegial relationships. What was I supposed to talk about? The weather? Sports? The secret colony of mermaids living beneath my workplace that I've been studying for 2 years? The isolation didn't bother me as much as it probably should have. I'd become comfortable in the space between 2 worlds, human and mermaid, known and unknown, speech and silence. The mermaids seemed comfortable with me too. They continued singing nightly, sometimes approaching to within 20 feet when I was in the water, close enough that I could see facial features through my camera. They were beautiful in an uncanny way, faces that suggested human ancestry, but had diverged millennia ago, adapting to deep water, pressure, cold, a life spent entirely submerged. I started recognizing individuals not just by voice but by appearance. One had a distinctive scar across her shoulder, old injury, long healed. Another was smaller than the rest, younger perhaps, staying close to a larger individual I assumed was a parent or guardian. A third had hair that was almost white, contrasting sharply with the darker shades of the others. I gave them names in my journals: Scar, Silver, Shadow, Coral, Pearl. Ridiculous names, anthropomorphic and presumptuous, but I needed some way to reference them systematically. They never came close enough to touch, never attempted direct communication beyond that first raised hand. But they allowed me to observe, tolerated my presence. Sometimes I thought I detected curiosity in the way they watched me, turning to track my movements, lingering near my position, occasionally mimicking my gestures. On the night of March 17th, 2001, 2 years almost to the day since I'd arrived on Platform 17, something changed. I was diving, positioned at 70 feet along the rig's northeast leg, camera running, when 3 mermaids approached closer than they'd ever come before. Maybe 12 feet away, close enough that I could see details without camera magnification. The one I named Scar moved ahead of the others, maintaining eye contact with me in a way that felt deliberate. She raised both hands, palms forward, in what could only be interpreted as a peaceful gesture. And then she sang. Not the distant harmonies I'd recorded on hydrophones. Not the group performances meant for her own kind. She sang directly to me. A solo vocalization, complex and controlled, sustained for nearly a minute. I didn't understand the meaning, but I understood the intent, communication. She was trying to tell me something, bridge the gap between our species using the only tool she had. When she finished, she waited, watching me, expectant. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't sing back. My vocal anatomy wasn't capable of producing those sounds underwater. I couldn't speak. My regulator prevented that. So I did the only thing I could think of. I raised my hand, mimicking her earlier gesture. She tilted her head, a gesture that looked remarkably human. Then she turned to the others, made a series of shorter vocalizations, and all three descended back into deeper water. I surfaced with my mind racing. That had been intentional communication. Not just observation, not tolerance of my presence. Active outreach. She tried to talk to me. Over the next 3 months, similar encounters happened 6 more times. Always initiated by the mermaids. Always with that same pattern, approach, vocalization, waiting for response. I started bringing a slate and underwater markers on my dives, drawing simple pictures, fish the rig, myself, trying to establish some form of mutual communication. They studied my drawings with clear interest. Once, Scar touched the slate where I'd drawn a fish, then pointed into the darkness where their hunting grounds presumably lay. Confirmation that she understood the representation. Progress was slow, limited by the fundamental differences in our communication methods and the secrecy I maintained. But progress nonetheless. By 2003, I'd been on Platform 17 for 4 years. I documented over 1,200 hours of mermaid vocalizations. I'd captured 30 hours of video footage. I made 43 night dives, gradually building a relationship with creatures that shouldn't exist. And I'd made peace with the choice I'd made. This was my life's work now, even if no one else could ever know about it. I was the bridge between species, the observer, the guardian of a secret that could reshape human understanding of evolution and marine biology and our place in the ocean's ecosystem. I'd found purpose in the darkness below the rig, even if that purpose was lonely, even if it meant lying every day to everyone I worked with, even if it meant I could never publish my findings, never share my discoveries, never receive recognition for what I'd learned. It was enough to know. It had to be enough. The years accumulated like sediment. 2003 became 2004, became 2005, became a decade of routine observations and incremental understanding. I turned 40 on the rig, alone in my quarters with a bottle of whiskey I'd smuggled aboard, listening through headphones to the singing that had become the soundtrack of my life. By 2009, 10 years into my tenure on Platform 17, I developed what I thought of as a functional understanding of the mermaid community below us. Not complete, not scientific in the traditional sense, but substantial. Population dynamics. The core group consisted of approximately 12 to 15 individuals who remained year-round in the waters around the rig. Genetic analysis was impossible without samples, but behavioral observation suggested family groups. Adults who consistently stayed close to juveniles, protective behaviors, teaching interactions. The younger ones were more curious, sometimes approaching to within 10 feet during my dives, while older individuals maintained cautious distance. Vocalizations. I'd cataloged 47 distinct song types in my recordings, ranging from simple repetitive patterns to complex compositions lasting over 10 minutes. Some appeared to be functional. Hunting coordination, warning calls, territorial announcements. Others seemed purely artistic or social. The most elaborate performances occurred during what I'd identified as seasonal gathering periods, when additional mermaids would arrive from elsewhere, temporarily swelling the population to 25 or more. These gatherings happened twice yearly, late spring, and early autumn. During these periods, the singing would intensify dramatically, sometimes continuing for 6 or 7 hours through the night. Multiple voices in harmony, patterns within patterns, complexity that suggested not just communication, but culture. Music for its own sake. Art. I'd learned to recognize life cycle events through changes in vocal patterns. In 2006, one of the juveniles, a smaller individual I'd been tracking for 3 years, suddenly started producing adult range vocalizations. A coming of age, perhaps, announced to the community through song. In 2007, 2 mermaids who frequently sang together began performing an elaborate duet that continued nightly for 6 weeks, growing progressively more complex and synchronized. By the end, they were inseparable, always swimming together, hunting together. Pair bonding. Marriage, in whatever form that concept took for them. In 2008, I documented what I believe was a birth. The singing that night was different, urgent, supportive, with multiple voices producing sounds I'd never heard before. Encouraging sounds, maybe, or the mermaid equivalent of coaching through labor. By morning, I could see through my deep water cameras a new presence in the group. Something very small, staying close to an adult's body, movements uncoordinated and hesitant. Over the following weeks, I watched that infant develop, learning to swim more efficiently, beginning to make its own sounds, interacting with other juveniles in what looked remarkably like play. The adults took turns watching over the young ones, never leaving them unguarded. Community raising, shared responsibility. I documented all of it in journals that now filled an entire footlocker in my quarters. Thousands of pages of observations, analysis, speculation. A lifetime of research that no one else could see. The relationship between the mermaids and me had evolved too. By 2009, they no longer fled when I entered the water. They'd approach within 5 or 6 feet, close enough that I could have reached out and touched them if I'd wanted to breach that final boundary. I never did. Some distances were important to maintain, but we developed what I thought of as mutual protocols. When I dove, I'd wait at 70 feet, lights on but pointed downward, camera visible. They'd approach if they wanted to interact, stay deeper if they didn't. On nights when I didn't dive, they'd swim closer to the surface, sometimes breaching briefly. I could see them from the rig's lower platforms, dark shapes breaking the surface in moonlight. I'd started leaving things for them. Small objects I thought might interest them. Waterproof tools, interesting rocks from other oceans I collected during my off-rotations. Once a waterproof harmonica I'd found in a shop in Aberdeen, thinking about their obvious love of music. The harmonica disappeared within a day. 2 weeks later, I heard tones in the nightly singing that hadn't been there before, notes that sounded eerily similar to harmonica notes, as if they'd studied the instrument and incorporated its sounds into their own music. They were learning from me, just as I was learning from them. In 2010, I made a decision that felt both momentous and inevitable. I stopped taking the 28-day off-rotations. I signed a modified contract with Pelagic Energy, allowing continuous residence on the rig, with only brief onshore trips for medical checkups and mandatory compliance training. Management was surprised, but accommodating. Long-term rig residents weren't common, but they weren't unprecedented either. Some engineers prefer the isolation. The continuity was actually beneficial. I become intimately familiar with every system on Platform 17, could detect problems by sound or vibration, had become indispensable. The truth was simpler. I couldn't leave them anymore. Every 28 days onshore felt like exile. I'd spend the time anxious, reviewing recordings, wondering what I was missing, worrying that something would happen in my absence. The rig was my home now. The mermaids were my community, even if that community would never fully accept me, never speak to me in ways I could understand, never know that I'd spent 11 years protecting their secret. But isolation takes a toll. By 2012, I'd been on Platform 17 for 13 years. I was 47 years old. My hair had gone mostly gray. I developed the physical characteristics of long-term rig workers. Excellent cardiovascular health from climbing stairs, chronic joint pain from cold and damp, mild hearing loss from constant machinery noise. My hands had scars from 100 small accidents. My social skills had atrophied from lack of use. I had no romantic relationships, no close friendships beyond surface-level camaraderie with rotating rig crews. My family, parents deceased, sister living in Oregon, had stopped calling years ago, tired of one-sided conversations with someone who never shared anything meaningful. I documented 3,400 hours of mermaid vocalizations. I'd made 127 night dives. I'd filled 23 journals with observations. I'd captured footage of behaviors that marine biologists would kill to study. Hunting techniques, social structures, would appear to be teaching moments where adults instructed juveniles. And I couldn't tell anyone. The weight of the secret had become physical. I'd lie awake some nights, thinking about marine biologists who'd dedicated careers to understanding cetacean intelligence, who'd never know that something more remarkable lived in these waters. Thinking about evolutionary biologists who debated for decades about the possibility of aquatic humanoids, never knowing the answer was yes, they existed, they were real, they were here. I'd robbed humanity of knowledge, protected the mermaids, yes, but also deprived the scientific community of what could be the most significant discovery in history. The rationalization I clung to, humanity wasn't ready. We'd exploit them, study them invasively, try to capture them, control them, use them. Better they remained hidden, safe, free in their deep water world. But some nights, the rationalization felt thin. On April 22, 2014, 15 years exactly since I'd first heard the singing, I sat in my quarters with my headphones on, listening to the nightly performance, and cried for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. Grief for the life I'd given up. Loneliness for the isolation I'd chosen. Pride in the work I'd done. Frustration at the inability to share it. Love for creatures who would never know I loved them. Guilt for keeping them secret. Guilt for considering revealing them. All of it compressed into silent tears, while 8 voices harmonized through my headphones, singing about things I'd never understand in a language I'd spent 15 years trying to learn. The singing was extraordinarily beautiful that night. One of the most complex performances I'd ever recorded. Voices weaving through each other, building toward crescendos, dropping to single voice passages before the group rejoined. It lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, I sat in silence, wiping my face, feeling hollowed out and strangely peaceful. This was my life. This secret, this knowledge, this lonely guardianship. I'd chosen it every day for 15 years. I'd choose it again tomorrow. But God, sometimes it was hard. The next decade brought changes I should have recognized as warnings. Looking back now, with 11 days, hindsight, and 14 empty bunks, the signs were obvious. But humans are gifted at normalizing the abnormal, explaining away the inexplicable. I was no exception. 2015 marked my 16th year on Platform 17. The rig itself was showing age, routine maintenance becoming more frequent, equipment failures increasing, the original 1987 infrastructure requiring constant attention. Pelagic Energy had committed to a 10-year extension rather than decommissioning, which meant infrastructure upgrades, new drilling equipment, expansion of production capacity. It also meant more noise. The Mermaids had tolerated 25 years of drilling operations, the constant mechanical hum, the seismic surveys, the ship traffic. But tolerance has limits. I started noticing changes in their behavior around 2016. The singing became less frequent. Not absent, but reduced from nightly performances to 3 or 4 times per week. When they did sing, the sessions were shorter, 20 or 30 minutes instead of hour-long compositions. The elaborate group harmonies became rarer. More often, it was solo vocalizations or simple call-and-response between 2 individuals. The seasonal gatherings shrank. In spring 2016, only 6 additional mermaids arrived for the gathering period, compared to the usual 12 to 15. The autumn gathering lasted only 3 weeks instead of the typical 6. By 2017, the permanent population around the rig had decreased from 12 to 15 individuals to maybe 8 or 9. I couldn't be certain. They stayed deeper, farther from my monitoring equipment, less visible during night dives. When I did see them, they seemed more cautious, maintaining greater distance. I documented all of it, growing increasingly concerned, but unable to do anything about it. What could I do? Report to management that our industrial operations were disturbing a secret mermaid population? Suggest we reduce drilling to accommodate creatures that supposedly didn't exist? I was trapped by my own secret. In December 2017, something happened that should have been my breaking point. One of the juveniles, a young mermaid I'd been observing for 6 years, since birth, who'd grown from helpless infant to curious adolescent, was killed. I didn't witness it directly, but I found the body. I was diving at night, checking hydrophone equipment at 85 feet, when I saw something pale and motionless caught in the rig's lateral support structure. At first, I thought it was a tarp or trash. Then my light caught it properly. A mermaid. Small. Unmoving. She was wedged between 2 support beams where they crossed, trapped by the tail. I could see immediately what had happened. She'd been swimming near the structure, probably at high speed. Juveniles were often reckless and miscalculated. The beams had caught her tail, and she'd either drowned trying to free herself or suffered injuries that proved fatal. She'd been there for days at least, possibly weeks. Decomposition was advanced, complicated by cold water and scavengers. But the body was undeniably humanoid, undeniably real. I should have surfaced immediately, should have reported it. This was physical evidence, a body, proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Instead, I freed her. It took 20 minutes of careful work, trying not to damage the remains further. When she finally came loose, she drifted downward, sinking into deeper water beyond my light's reach. I watched her disappear, taking my best chance at proof with her. I justified it as respect. She deserved to return to her people, to be mourned by her community, not dissected in some laboratory. But I knew the real reason. I was afraid. Afraid of what revealing the body would trigger. Afraid of losing the relationship I'd built over 18 years. Afraid of the changes that proof would bring. So I let her sink into darkness, and I surfaced, and I said nothing. That night there was no singing. Or the night after. Or the night after that. For 3 weeks, the hydrophones captured only silence. The mermaids had disappeared entirely, presumably retreating to deeper waters to grieve or conduct whatever rituals they had for death. When the singing finally resumed, it was different, mournful. Single voices, alone, producing long, sustained notes that sounded like keening. I'd heard them mourn before, after deaths in the community, usually from old age or natural causes, but this felt different, angrier. They didn't approach the rig anymore. No more curious juveniles at 70 feet. No more adults maintaining watchful distance. They stayed deep, staying away from the structure that had killed one of their own. I'd lost their trust. Over the next 2 years, the distance increased. By 2019, I rarely saw them at all during dives. The singing continued, proof they were still present, but they'd withdrawn, limiting contact, treating the rig and everything associated with it as a threat to be avoided. I couldn't blame them. In 2020, Pelagic Energy announced major upgrades to Platform 17's drilling capacity. New equipment, deeper wells, expansion to previously untapped reservoirs. The work would take 3 years and represent a $400 million investment in extending the platform's operational life through 2045. The installation process began in March 2021. Pyle driving for additional support structures. Seismic surveys using high-intensity acoustic arrays. Construction vessels arriving and departing constantly. Underwater welding producing noise and light pollution at depths the mermaids had previously considered safe. The singing decreased further. Some weeks, I'd only hear it once. The vocalizations that did occur were short, simple, basic communication rather than the elaborate compositions I'd documented in earlier years. The population dropped to perhaps 5 or 6 individuals who remained year-round. No seasonal gatherings occurred in 2021 or 2022. The community that had existed here for who knows how long, decades, centuries, was collapsing under the pressure of human industrial expansion. And I watched it happen, documenting the decline, unable to intervene. By late 2023, I was 54 years old and had been on Platform 17 for nearly 25 years. I'd become a fixture, the senior engineer who never left, who knew every system intimately, who could diagnose problems by sound alone. Management valued me. Co-workers respected me. I had job security, good pay, purpose. But I'd also watched as my 25-year study subject was slowly destroyed by the very industry that employed me. The cognitive dissonance was becoming unbearable. Every day, I worked to maintain systems that were driving the mermaids away. Every night, I listened to their diminished singing and felt complicit in their displacement. I started having dreams about the juvenile I'd found dead, trapped in the rig's structure. In the dreams, she was alive, looking at me with eyes that were too human, asking why I'd let this happen, why I kept them secret instead of protecting them, why I'd chosen my job, my comfort, my security over their survival. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., sweating despite the cold, and sit in darkness listening for singing that came less and less frequently. The warning signs were everywhere by early 2024. The singing had become sporadic, maybe once or twice a week, always brief. The voices sounded strained, stressed. I hadn't seen a juvenile in over a year. The mermaids who remained were staying deeper than my equipment could effectively monitor, beyond 1,100 feet, in waters that required specialized equipment to access. They were being pushed out of their territory by the rig's expansion. Slowly but inexorably, we were taking their home. I started drafting a letter to Pelagic Energy Management. I must have written 30 versions, trying to find words that would convey the urgency without revealing too much, that would get them to halt operations without exposing the mermaids to the very exploitation I'd spent 25 years trying to prevent. Every version ended up in my encrypted files, unfinished, insufficient. How do you explain that we're destroying something precious when you can't prove that something exists? How do you advocate for a species' rights when acknowledging their existence would likely doom them? I was paralyzed by the same contradictions that had defined my entire tenure on Platform 17. In October 2024, something changed in the singing. I noticed it immediately, a shift in tone, in structure, and content. The vocalizations became more urgent, more repetitive. The same patterns repeated night after night, growing in intensity. It reminded me of warning calls I'd documented earlier, vocalizations they produced when predators were near or when danger threatened the group. But this was different, sustained, desperate. They were trying to tell me something. I spent hours analyzing the recordings, comparing frequency patterns to my historical database, looking for matches or precedents. The closest analog was from 2003, when a subsea earthquake had registered 4.2 on the Richter scale. They produced similar urgent, repetitive calls in the hours before the quake hit. Were they warning about geological instability, equipment failure, some threat I couldn't perceive? I checked rig systems obsessively, ran diagnostics on every major component, reviewed seismic data, found nothing anomalous. As far as official monitoring was concerned, Platform 17 was operating normally. But the warning calls continued. Through October, through November, growing more urgent, more frequent. By mid-November 2024, they were producing the calls every night, sometimes for hours. Multiple voices in unison, hammering the same patterns over and over. I was the only person who heard it. The only person on the rig who monitored those frequencies, who had equipment sensitive enough to capture the vocalizations, who had 25 years of experience learning to interpret their sounds. And I didn't know what they were trying to say. On December 3rd, 2024, I broke protocol. I went to the rig manager, Susan Ortiz, a competent administrator I'd worked with for 6 years. I told her I was picking up unusual acoustic signatures on hydrophones. I didn't specify what kind, and that historical data suggested they sometimes correlated with structural or geological issues. I recommended we halt drilling operations temporarily, conduct comprehensive integrity assessments, review all subsea equipment for potential failure points. She listened patiently, reviewed my carefully sanitized data, and thanked me for my diligence. Then she explained that we were on a strict timeline for the upgrades. Halting operations without specific evidence of imminent failure would cost Pelagic Energy approximately $400,000 per day. Unless I could provide concrete proof of a safety risk, we'd continue as scheduled. Did I have concrete proof? No, just the desperate warnings of creatures she didn't know existed, telling me something was wrong in a language I'd spent 25 years failing to fully understand. Operations continued. The warning calls intensified. On December 8, 2024, at approximately 11:30 p.m., the singing stopped. Not gradually, not fading out or diminishing. Just stopped. Mid-vocalization, the hydrophones captured what sounded like an abrupt interruption, and then silence. Complete, absolute silence from depths that had been producing urgent warning calls continuously for nearly 2 months. I sat in my office, headphones on, staring at the spectrogram showing flatline where there should have been activity. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. I checked equipment. All systems functioning normally. I reviewed the audio from the moment the singing stopped, listening for any clue. There was nothing. Just the warning pattern, mid-phrase, and then empty ocean noise. They'd either fled entirely, leaving the area without completing the call, or something had stopped them. I sat there until 3 a.m., listening to silence, feeling dread settle into my bones like cold seawater. By morning, I made a decision. Whatever was coming, whatever they'd been trying to warn about, I couldn't face it alone anymore. I needed to document everything, create a record, prepare to reveal the truth regardless of consequences. I spent December 9th and 10th organizing my research. 25 years of journals, recordings, footage, analysis. I compiled the most compelling evidence, created summaries, drafted an account of everything I'd observed. I backed up files to multiple drives, uploaded encrypted copies to cloud storage, prepared hard copies that I sealed in waterproof containers. If something happened to me, if the rig was compromised, if whatever the mermaids had been warning about came to pass, there would be a record, proof that they'd existed, evidence of what I'd learned. It felt like writing a will. On December 11th, the night shift reported unusual sounds in the water around the rig. Deep groans, resonant impacts against the legs, scraping noises from below the waterline. Maintenance crews investigated, but found nothing visible from the lower platforms. I listened to the hydrophone recordings. The sounds were biological, definitely biological, but unlike anything in my 25 years of monitoring. Deep, powerful, resonant. Not mermaid vocalizations. Something else. Something larger. The sounds continued through the day, irregular intervals, approaching and receding, circling the rig in the deeper water. That night, December 11th, 2024, 11:47 p.m., I was in my office reviewing acoustic data when the lights flickered. Not unusual. Electrical fluctuations happened. But this felt different. The lights dimmed, recovered, dimmed again. The hum of machinery shifted pitch momentarily. And then I heard it through the hydrophones, a sound so deep, so powerful, that it registered more as vibration than audio. Felt through the rig structure, transmitted up through steel and concrete, resonating in my chest. The sound lasted approximately 8 seconds. When it ended, alarms started going off across the platform. I bolted from my office, alarms shrieking through the corridors. Emergency lighting strobed red and white. Personnel were emerging from quarters, pulling on coveralls, moving toward muster stations with the practiced efficiency of routine drills. But this wasn't a drill. I reached the operations center to find night shift supervisor Marcus Webb coordinating response. 4 separate systems had triggered simultaneously: subsea equipment monitoring, structural integrity sensors, the automated shutdown protocol for drill site 3, and the emergency ballast system. What happened? I asked, pushing through the small crowd of engineers and technicians. Marcus looked up from his terminal, face tight with concentration. Don't know yet. Multiple sensor trips, but readouts are contradictory. Looks like an impact against the northwest leg at approximately 840 feet depth. But the force readings don't make sense, suggest something hit us hard enough to trigger structural alarms. But there's no visible damage on the external cameras. I felt my stomach drop. Northwest leg, 840 feet. Exactly where I documented the highest concentration of mermaid activity over the years. What about sonar? Did we detect anything approaching? That's the weird part. Nothing on sonar. No vessels, no submarines, no large marine life. Whatever hit us wasn't there until it was there, if that makes sense. It didn't. Not to him. But I had ideas I couldn't voice. Permission to check my acoustic monitoring equipment. I might have captured something. Marcus nodded, already moving to the next crisis. Yeah, go. Report back if you find anything useful. I returned to my office, hands shaking as I pulled up the hydrophone recordings from the past 10 minutes. I isolated the feeds from the sensors positioned at various depths on the northwest leg, synchronized the timestamps, and played back the moments around the impact. What I heard made my blood run cold. At 11 hours, 46 minutes, and 54 seconds, hydrophone NW 840 captured that impossibly deep sound, the one I'd felt through the rig structure. But before it, barely audible under the ambient noise, there were other sounds. Familiar sounds. Vocalizations. Dozens of them. Mermaids. Not the warning calls they'd been producing for weeks, but something else entirely. High-pitched, rapid, overlapping. Panicked. They were fleeing. The deep sound came at 11 hours, 47 minutes, and 2 seconds. 8 full seconds of resonance that peaked at frequencies below 20 hertz, in the infrasound range that's felt rather than heard. Whales produce sounds like that. Ships did too. But the acoustic signature was organic, biological, and unlike anything in my database. At 11 hours, 47 minutes, and 11 seconds, the impact. I could see it on the spectrogram, a sharp spike of broadband noise as something massive struck the rig's leg. And then, silence. Complete absence of the mermaid vocalizations that had been there moments before. They were gone. The panic calls had ceased. Either they'd fled beyond my hydrophone's range, or I didn't want to finish that thought. I made copies of the recordings, flagged the relevant sections, and returned to operations. The rig was in controlled chaos, teams conducting damage assessments, checking for breaches, inspecting the integrity of every critical system. Initial reports suggested minimal damage. Some sensor arrays had been knocked offline. External cameras on the northwest leg weren't responding, but the structural integrity of the leg itself appeared sound. By 1:30 a.m., the alarm levels had been reduced. The automated safety protocols had done their job, isolating potentially compromised systems, shutting down active drilling until inspections could be completed. Marcus declared the situation contained, if not explained. We'll send divers down at first light, he announced to the assembled personnel. Full inspection of the northwest leg from the waterline to 200 feet. ROV survey below that. Until we know what hit us and confirm there's no damage, drill sites 3 and 4 remain offline. The crowd dispersed, returning to quarters or workstations, murmuring theories. Rogue wave, submarine collision, equipment malfunction, structural failure. Nobody suggested what I knew in my bones was true. Something had attacked us. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my office, reviewing 25 years of recordings, comparing the deep sound to anything in my database. Nothing matched. This wasn't a mermaid vocalization. This was something else. Something that had sent the mermaids fleeing in panic. Something that had been coming. That's what they'd been warning about for 2 months. Not geological instability or equipment failure. This creature, this presence, this thing that produced sounds deep enough to vibrate steel and strike hard enough to trigger structural alarms. And now the mermaids were gone. Dawn came gray and cold. Wind at 20 knots. Waves running 6 to 8 feet. Not ideal diving conditions, but within acceptable parameters. At 7 a.m., a 4-person dive team entered the water to inspect the northwest leg. I watched from the lower observation platform, binoculars trained on their position, watching their bubbles track down the leg surface. They'd inspect the leg systematically, checking for cracks, deformation, any sign of impact damage. What they'd find, I already knew. Nothing definitive. Maybe some scratched paint, disturbed biofouling. But no structural compromise. Because whatever had hit us hadn't been trying to damage the rig. It had been passing through, chasing something, or fleeing from something, or marking territory. The dive team surfaced after 40 minutes. Their report confirmed my prediction. Minor cosmetic damage, no structural issues. Recommendation: resume normal operations. By noon, drill sites 3 and 4 were back online. Management declared the incident resolved. Likely a collision with a large piece of marine debris or an unusually large marine animal. Pelagic Energy's safety protocols had functioned perfectly. We'd file a report, document the event, move on. But I couldn't move on, because that night, December 12th, there was no singing. The hydrophones captured the usual sounds: rig machinery, distant ship traffic, fish, and crustaceans. But no mermaids. Not a single vocalization. Not from the regular population, not from transients passing through. December 13th, silence. December 14th, silence. By December 15th, I was seriously considering violating 25 years of secrecy. The mermaids had vanished. Either they'd fled the area entirely, abandoning territory they'd occupied for who knows how long, or something had happened to them. Something connected to that deep, resonant sound and the impact against the rig. I needed to know, but I couldn't check without revealing what I'd been monitoring. I compromised. On December 16th, I requested permission to conduct a personal recreational dive to inspect remote sensors in the area where I'd historically observed the most mermaid activity. Marcus approved without much thought. I was the senior engineer, sensor maintenance was my job, and personal dives weren't unusual for me. I entered the water at 2 a.m. on December 17th, descending to 85 feet along the northwest leg. The water was cold, visibility poor, bioluminescent plankton creating starfields in my light beam. I descended slowly, methodically, checking the places where I'd reliably found mermaids over the past 25 years. Empty. The hydrophone mounting points where they'd sometimes rest showed no recent sign of activity. The hunting grounds where I'd filmed them coordinating to catch squid were devoid of any presence. The rocky outcropping at 95 feet that had served as a gathering point, I'd documented hundreds of meetings there, was abandoned. I went deeper, pushing to 110 feet, then 120, beyond recreational diving limits, into water that required careful attention to decompression. Still nothing. At 127 feet, my light caught something pale. I approached carefully, heart hammering. Please don't be a body. Please don't be. It was a shell, large, spiraled, obviously placed deliberately on a small ledge. Next to it, several stones arranged in a circular pattern. And beyond, more stones, more shells, creating a trail leading deeper into darkness. The pattern I'd seen Marina create in that reference story. The pattern that meant home. They'd left a message, telling me where they'd gone. I followed the trail deeper, 135 feet, 142 feet, pushing the limits of safety. The trail led away from the rig, out into open water, toward the abyssal plain where the continental shelf dropped off. At 148 feet, the trail ended at another deliberate arrangement, shells forming an X, the universal symbol for warning, danger, stop. The message was clear: we've gone deeper. Don't follow. It's not safe here anymore. I hovered there in the darkness, looking down into water I couldn't safely access without specialized equipment, feeling grief and relief compete in my chest. They were alive. They'd fled rather than stayed to face whatever had come. But they were gone, possibly permanently, driven from territory they called home. And I'd been powerless to protect them. I ascended slowly, completing the necessary decompression stops, surfaced at 3:47 a.m., and returned to my quarters to document what I'd found. The next 3 days passed in tense normalcy. Operations continued. The rig functioned. Personnel went about their routines, the incident from December 11th already fading into the background noise of platform life. Just another anomalous event in the catalog of unexplained ocean phenomena that rig workers accumulated over careers. But I couldn't shake the dread. The mermaids had fled. Their 2-month warning had been about something specific, something they'd known was coming. And whatever it was had arrived, driven them away, and now what? Had it left? Was it still here, in the deeper waters? What had it wanted? On the night of December 19th, I got my answer. I was in my office at 10:45 p.m., reviewing acoustic data from the previous 24 hours, when I heard it again, that impossibly deep sound. Longer this time, nearly 15 seconds, resonating up through the rig's structure, making my desk vibrate, my computer monitor blur. I pulled up the real-time hydrophone feeds. The sound was coming from directly beneath us, from the deepest hydrophone, positioned at 1,180 feet near the ocean floor. And it wasn't alone. I could see multiple acoustic signatures on the spectrogram, at least 3 distinct sources producing similar frequencies, moving in coordinated patterns. They were circling the rig, slowly, deliberately at depth, occasionally rising higher, approaching to within 800 or 900 feet of the surface, then descending again. I recorded everything, tracking their movements, trying to estimate size based on the acoustic displacement. The numbers I got back were absurd. To produce sound at those frequencies and amplitudes, the sources would need to be massive, 30, 40, maybe 50 feet long. Blue whale size or larger. But these weren't whales. The movement patterns were wrong. The sounds too sustained and controlled. This was deliberate, purposeful behavior. They were patrolling or hunting. The sounds continued for 3 hours, finally fading around 2 a.m. as the sources moved away toward deeper water, off the edge of the continental shelf. I sat in my office until dawn, watching the spectrogram, waiting for them to return. They didn't. Not that night. But they would. I knew they would. Because whatever these creatures were, they'd claimed this territory, driven away the previous inhabitants. And we, Platform 17, with our drilling and our noise and our 180 personnel, were now living in their domain. The sounds came every night for the next week. Never at the same time, never following the same pattern, but always there, deep, resonant, circling in the depths below us. I documented every instance, tracking movements, analyzing acoustic signatures, building a profile of these new arrivals. By December 26th, I'd identified at least 5 distinct individuals based on subtle variations in their vocalizations. I'd cataloged 3 types of sounds they produced: the deep resonance communication, echolocation, sharper clicks, definitely echolocation, similar to sperm whales, and something else, a low-frequency pulse that registered more as pressure than sound, making my inner ear ache even through recordings. I'd also confirmed they were hunting. On Christmas Eve, the hydrophones captured sounds I recognized: dolphins in distress, high-pitched squeals, panicked clicking, the acoustic chaos of prey animals fleeing. The chase lasted 6 minutes, tracking across my hydrophone array. Then, silence. And moments later, that deep resonance again, almost satisfied sounding. They'd killed and eaten the dolphins. At least 2, possibly 3, based on the audio. I sat alone in my quarters on Christmas Day, eating reheated turkey from the galley, listening through headphones to the sounds of apex predators patrolling the waters beneath us. Whatever these creatures were, they were at the top of the food chain here. Large enough to hunt dolphins, intelligent enough to coordinate, present enough that they'd driven away an entire population of mermaids. And we'd been living above them for a week, oblivious. I couldn't keep this secret anymore. The mermaids were one thing: peaceful, avoidant, clearly trying to coexist without contact. These creatures were different. They were predators, and they were getting closer. On December 27th, I requested a meeting with Susan Ortiz, the rig manager. I prepared a presentation, carefully edited to remove any mention of mermaids, but including everything about the new acoustic signatures. I framed it as a concern about unusually large predatory marine life in the area, possibly posing a risk to diving operations or subsea equipment. Susan listened patiently, reviewed my data, asked intelligent questions about the acoustic analysis. Then she thanked me for my diligence and explained, kindly but firmly, that large marine predators were common in North Atlantic waters. Orcas hunted here, pilot whales, even great whites occasionally. Unless I had evidence of direct threat to personnel or infrastructure, this was normal ocean activity. "Thomas," she said, her tone suggesting this wasn't the first time she'd had this conversation with me. I know you've been here a long time. Sometimes isolation can make us hypersensitive to things that are actually routine. Have you considered taking a rotation onshore? Maybe get some distance, fresh perspective? I recognized what she was really saying. You're showing signs of North Sea syndrome. Paranoia, hypervigilance, obsessive focus on minor anomalies. Maybe you need psychological evaluation. I thanked her, assured her I was fine, and left her office knowing I was on my own. That night, December 27th, 10:33 p.m., everything changed. I was monitoring the hydrophones when I caught a new sound. Not the deep predators. Something else. Higher frequency, complex, almost frantic. Mermaids. Singing again. But not their usual vocalizations. This was different, urgent, distressed, multiple voices overlapping in cacophony rather than harmony. And they were close. Much closer than they'd been since fleeing. Maybe 600 feet depth, rising toward the rig. I pulled on clothes, grabbed my emergency dive gear, and ran for the lower platforms. The night was clear, moonlight turning the ocean silver. From a northwest observation point, I could see disturbances in the water, shapes breaching, diving, moving with desperate speed toward the rig's legs. They were being chased. I scanned the water, counting shapes. 4, maybe 5 mermaids swimming in panic. And behind them, rising from deeper water, something else. Something massive. Even in moonlight from 80 feet above the surface, I could see it clearly. A shape at least 40 feet long, serpentine, moving with powerful undulations. Where it broke the surface briefly, I caught details, scaled skin, massive head, jaws that could have swallowed a person whole. One of the mermaids wasn't going to make it. She was falling behind, injured or exhausted, struggling to keep pace. The creature closed the distance with terrifying speed. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed an emergency flare from the safety station, struck it, and threw it as hard as I could toward the water between the mermaid and her pursuer. The flare hit the surface, burning brilliant red against the dark water. The creature veered away from the sudden light and noise, circling, confused or cautious. The mermaid used those precious seconds to reach the rig's leg, disappearing into the maze of support structures where something that size couldn't follow. The creature circled twice more, producing that deep resonant sound. Anger? Frustration? Then descended, returning to deeper water. I stood there shaking, flare, smoke drifting across the platform, knowing I'd just revealed 25 years of secret observation to protect them. Someone must have seen. The flare, my presence on the platform at this hour, my obvious focus on something in the water. Behind me, a voice. What the fuck was that? I turned to find Marcus Webb, the night supervisor, standing in the access corridor. He'd clearly just emerged, drawn by the flare. His expression was caught between confusion and alarm. Something was chasing them, I said, because there was no point lying now. In the water. Did you see it? See what? I saw you throw a flare. Are you doing some kind of unauthorized test? Because that's a safety violation. Marcus, look at the water. Tell me you don't see them. He moved to the railing, scanning the surface. The mermaids were still there, 4 of them visible near the rig's leg, floating at the surface, recovering. In moonlight, their humanoid features were undeniable. Marcus stared for a long moment. Then, what am I looking at, Thomas? The truth, I said. The thing I've been trying to protect for 25 years. We stood at the railing for 10 minutes, watching the mermaids. They stayed near the rig's leg, clearly exhausted, occasionally diving beneath the surface before reappearing. Even from our position 80 feet above, their nature was undeniable. Humanoid torsos, arms, long hair, tails where legs should be. Marcus didn't speak. He just watched, his expression cycling through disbelief, fascination, fear, and returning to disbelief. Finally, this is a prank. Special effects, some kind of, I don't know. This isn't real. It's real. They've been here for at least 25 years. Probably longer. I've been monitoring them since 1999. He turned to look at me. You've known about this for 25 years and never reported it? I was protecting them. If word got out, they'd be hunted, captured, studied. I've been documenting them, learning about them, trying to understand. Jesus Christ, Thomas. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, visibly struggling to process. Do you understand what you're telling me? Those things down there are people, intelligent, social, with culture and language. They're not things. He stopped, watching as one of the mermaids looked up toward the platform, directly at us. Even from this distance, I could see the intelligence in that gaze. The awareness. Marcus swallowed hard. Okay. Assuming I'm not having a psychotic break, and those are actually real, what the hell was chasing them? Something that arrived 3 weeks ago. Something bigger. I've been tracking it on the acoustic monitors. It's been patrolling the area, hunting. It drove the mermaids away initially. These four must have been trying to return to their territory. It caught them in the open. How big? Based on acoustic analysis? 40 to 50 feet, possibly larger. I've documented at least 5 distinct individuals. Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing. Then he pulled out his radio. I need to report this. To Susan, to headquarters, to... I grabbed his wrist. Marcus, please. Think about what happens if you do. Within 24 hours, this platform will be swarming with military, scientists, media. Those mermaids down there will lose any chance at freedom. There'll be specimens, property, diplomatic incidents between nations arguing over whose rights to them. And those predators? We don't understand them, don't know what they're capable of. If we provoke them. So what are you suggesting? We just don't report the fact that there are fucking mermaids and sea monsters living under our rig. I'm suggesting we're careful. Strategic. We document. We understand the situation. We think about consequences before we act. These creatures, both species, have been here longer than we have. This is their ocean. We're the invaders. Marcus pulled his arm free, but he didn't raise the radio. This is insane. I need to think. Take your time. But while you're thinking, those mermaids are still down there, exhausted and exposed. And those predators could come back. As if summoned by my words, the hydrophones, still streaming audio to my headset, which I'd forgotten I was wearing, picked up that deep resonance again. Closer this time. The predators were returning, drawn by the disturbance or following the mermaid's trail. They're coming back, I said. The predators. Maybe 2 minutes out, approaching from the northeast. How do you know? I have hydrophones all over this rig. I've been tracking them for weeks. Trust me, the mermaids heard it too. I could see them react, vocalizations I couldn't hear from this distance, but could see in their body language, panic, exhaustion, nowhere to run. They'd flee to the rig's structure for shelter, but they couldn't hide there forever. Eventually they'd need open water to hunt, to rest, to swim. And the predators would be waiting. We need to do something, Marcus said, surprising me. Like what? I don't know. But we've got floodlights, we've got tools. If light scared them off before, maybe we can use that. It was a terrible idea for a dozen reasons, but I couldn't think of a better one. Okay, operations center, flood controls. We ran through corridors, upstairs, into the operations center where the night shift skeleton crew, 2 technicians, and a communications officer, looked up in surprise. Emergency lighting, Marcus ordered. External floods, all platforms, northwest quadrant. Full intensity. Sir, that's going to draw attention from every vessel within. Now, the technician complied, fingers moving across the control panel. Outside, massive floodlights blazed to life, turning night to day across the northwest section of the rig, illuminating the water below. The mermaids were clearly visible now, trapped in the light. But so was something else. Shadows in the deeper water, rising. Multiple shapes, large, moving with coordinated purpose. Jesus, whispered the communications officer. What is that? Keep the lights on them, I said. Don't let them get close to the surface. The predators circled just below effective light penetration, maybe 60 feet down. I could see their forms moving, serpentine and powerful. They didn't like the light, didn't approach into the illuminated area. But they weren't leaving either. They were waiting, patient, confident that eventually the lights would go off or the mermaids would flee and darkness would return. Stalemate. This can't hold, Marcus said quietly. Eventually, someone's going to ask why we've lit up the northwest quadrant like a stadium. Eventually, those things down there will find a way through. Eventually. I know. We maintained the lighting for 30 minutes. By then, other personnel had noticed we're gathering, asking questions. Marcus fielded them with quick lies about equipment testing and safety drills. But the explanations were thin. People weren't stupid. They could see something was happening in the water. At 11:47 p.m., I noted the time because it matched almost exactly with the initial impact 3 weeks earlier. The predators gave up. The shadows descended, retreating to deeper water, abandoning the hunt. For now, the mermaids remained near the surface for another 15 minutes, recovering, before diving and disappearing toward the west, away from the rig, toward waters we couldn't monitor. I hoped they'd survive. Marcus killed the floodlights. The rig returned to its normal night lighting, darkness reclaiming the ocean. Personnel dispersed, still murmuring questions, but following orders to return to stations or quarters. In the operations center, Marcus and I stood in silence, both understanding that we'd crossed a threshold we couldn't uncross. Tomorrow morning, Marcus said finally, we're meeting with Susan. We're going to explain everything. All of it. The mermaids, your monitoring, those predators, the situation we're in. And then we're going to figure out what the hell to do about it. I nodded. 25 years of secrecy ending in a single night. But maybe that's how it needed to happen. Maybe I've been wrong to hide this for so long. Maybe transparency was the only path forward now. Tomorrow, I agreed. But tomorrow never came. December 28th dawned cold and overcast. Winds at 25 knots, seas running 8 to 10 feet. Not dangerous conditions for a platform this size, but unpleasant enough that most personnel stayed indoors, going about their duties with minimal time on exposed decks. I met Marcus and Susan in her office at 8 a.m. I brought my laptop with 25 years of documentation, journals, recordings, videos, analysis. The evidence of a lifetime of secret research, organized and indexed, ready to be revealed. Susan listened to our account with an expression that moved from skepticism to incredulity to something approaching anger. When we finished, she was silent for a long time, staring at the frozen video frame on my laptop screen. 3 mermaids clearly visible at 20 feet depth, faces turned toward the camera. This is real, she said finally. Not a question, a statement requiring confirmation. Yes. You've been monitoring intelligent, non-human life living beneath this rig for 25 years and never reported it. I was protecting them. You were making decisions that weren't yours to make, Thomas. Withholding information that could have affected operations, safety, environmental assessments. Do you understand the liability exposure you've created? For yourself, for Pelagic Energy, for everyone on this rig. Understand. But if I'd reported this, they would have been studied, yes. Documented. Possibly protected under international marine mammal treaties. Or possibly exploited. We don't know, because you decided to play God and keep them secret instead. She wasn't wrong. I'd made that choice consciously, repeatedly, for 25 years. And now I was facing consequences. What about the predators? Marcus interjected. Whatever Thomas did or didn't do in the past, we've got an immediate situation. There are large predatory animals circling this rig. That's a safety issue regardless of anything else. Susan nodded slowly. Show me the acoustic data on those. I pulled up the recordings from the past 3 weeks, the deep vocalizations, the movement patterns, the dolphin hunt, last night's chase. Susan reviewed everything with the focused attention of someone trained in crisis management. Estimated size? 40 to 50 feet, possibly larger. Multiple individuals, at least 5 distinct acoustic signatures. Behavior consistent with apex predators establishing territory. Behavior toward humans? Unknown. No direct contact, but they're aggressive toward the mermaids. They're hunting dolphins and other marine life. I wouldn't assume we're safe if someone ended up in the water. Susan pulled up Platform 17's personnel roster on her computer. We've got 164 people on the rig currently. Normal operational capacity. If these creatures pose a potential threat, We need to suspend water-based operations, Marcus said. No diving, no subsea equipment maintenance that requires personnel in the water. Maybe consider reducing personnel count, sending non-essential staff onshore until we understand the situation better. That's going to raise questions. From headquarters, from regulatory agencies, from personnel themselves. We can't just suspend operations without explanation. We tell them the truth, I said. Or part of it. Large predatory marine life in the area, potential safety risk, taking precautions until we've conducted a full assessment. Susan considered for a long moment. Then, okay, here's what we're going to do. Marcus, implement water operation restrictions immediately. Frame it as a precaution based on acoustic monitoring suggesting large marine predators. Thomas, you're going to compile your data just on the predators, not the other thing, into a formal report I can send to headquarters. I need scientific documentation, recommendations, risk assessment. And the mermaids? I asked. We're going to table that discussion until we've dealt with the immediate threat. Those creatures have been here for 25 years without incident. They're not the pressing problem. The 50-foot predators are. It was a compromise I could live with. For now, the mermaid's secret would hold, and we'd focus on the more immediate danger. I spent December 28th and 29th preparing the report, carefully editing out any mention of mermaids while documenting everything about the predators. Acoustic signatures, behavioral observations, size estimates, threat assessment. I framed it as concerning but manageable. Large marine predators were not unprecedented in North Sea waters. Recommended precautions were sensible and temporary. Susan submitted the report to Pelagic Energy headquarters on December 30th. We expected questions, maybe a team of marine biologists brought in to assess. What we got instead was a brief acknowledgement email thanking us for the information and authorizing a 2-week operational modification while they reviewed. 2 weeks. We could work with that. The predators continued their nightly patrols through the end of December. I tracked them obsessively, mapping their movements, looking for patterns. They circled the rig in irregular intervals, sometimes staying deep, other times rising to within 200 feet of the surface. They hunted successfully. I documented 6 instances of prey kills based on acoustic signatures. They seemed to be settling in, claiming this territory as their own. The mermaids didn't return. My hydrophones picked up nothing in the frequency ranges they used. I hoped they'd found safety in deeper waters, beyond the range of the predators, or in areas the predators didn't patrol. I hoped they'd survived. New Year's Eve passed quietly on the rig. Limited celebration, security concerns, and operational modifications had put everyone on edge. I spent the evening in my office, listening to the ocean, thinking about the 25 years that had passed since I'd first heard singing in these waters. A quarter-century of secret observation, of learning and documenting and protecting something precious. Now exposed, vulnerable, complicated by the arrival of these new predators. I tried to play guardian and had maybe only delayed the inevitable. Knowledge eventually surfaces. Secrets eventually break open. But I'd given them 25 years of safety. That had to count for something. On January 2nd, 2025, 3 days ago now, the predators' behavior changed. The nightly patrols continued, but they'd expanded their range. They were spending more time closer to the rig's legs at shallower depths. Several times I picked up sounds that suggested they were investigating the structure itself. Echolocation pings, bouncing off steel, physical contact with support beams, exploratory behavior. They were getting comfortable with us, treating the rig as part of their environment rather than a threat to avoid. That made me nervous. On January 3rd, 2 days ago, we had our first close encounter. A maintenance crew was working on the exterior of Module C, the southwestern living quarters, doing routine welding repairs at deck level. The work required them to be in an elevated platform extending out over the water, about 60 feet above the surface. At 2:17 p.m., one of the predators surfaced directly below them. I wasn't present, but I heard the accounts from 6 different witnesses. The creature rose from the water in a spy hop behavior, vertical orientation, head above surface, looking around. It stayed like that for approximately 10 seconds, clearly visible to the work crew before sliding back beneath the waves. Descriptions varied, but common elements emerged. Massive head, jaw structure suggesting carnivorous diet, eyes that tracked the platform and the people on it, skin covered in scales that were dark blue-gray with lighter ventral coloring. One witness said it looked like a sea serpent from old maps. Another said a mosasaur, referencing the extinct marine reptiles. The size estimates range from 35 to 60 feet, fear and perspective making measurements unreliable. But everyone agreed. It was enormous, clearly predatory, and it had looked at them with intelligence. The work crew evacuated immediately. Susan ordered all external maintenance suspended until further notice. Personnel were restricted to interior spaces unless absolutely necessary. The psychological impact was immediate. Fear spread through the rig. Not panic, but deep unease. People who'd worked in offshore oil for decades, who'd weathered storms and equipment failures and countless dangers, were spooked by the knowledge that something massive and unknown was circling beneath us. I didn't blame them. I was spooked too. That afternoon, Susan called an all-hands meeting in the main galley. All 164 personnel crammed into the space, standing room only. She explained the situation calmly and professionally. Large marine predators in the area, behavior suggesting increased comfort near the platform, restrictions on water operations and external activities until the creatures moved on or we developed better protocols for coexistence. She didn't mention mermaids. Didn't mention that I've been tracking these events for weeks. Framed it as a recent development we were managing proactively. Questions came fast. Were we in danger? Should we evacuate? What kind of creatures were these? Could they attack the rig itself? Susan handled it well, projecting confidence and control. The rig was structurally sound. The creatures had shown no aggressive behavior toward the platform itself. This was a precautionary measure. We'd continue monitoring, adjust protocols as needed, coordinate with marine biology experts on shore. She was lying mostly. We had no experts consulting. Headquarters had gone silent after the initial acknowledgement. We were on our own, making decisions in real time, hoping we were managing a situation that we barely understood. The meeting dispersed with personnel, somewhat reassured but still nervous. That night, the galley was unusually crowded. People seeking company, not wanting to be alone in quarters. Conversations focused on the creatures, trading theories, and speculation. I sat alone in my office, listening to the hydrophones. The predators were out there, circling. 5 distinct signatures, moving in coordinated patterns. They'd found rich hunting grounds here, abundant marine life, deep water, territory the mermaids had apparently abandoned. Why would they leave? Around midnight, I heard something new on hydrophones. Not the predators. Something else. Mermaid vocalizations. Distant, barely detectable, at the very edge of my monitoring range. To the northwest, in deeper water. They were still here or nearby. Hiding, surviving, waiting. Waiting for what? I had a terrible thought. Waiting for us to leave. 25 years ago, this had been their territory. They'd lived here, maybe for generations before that. Then we'd built the rig, started drilling, filled their waters with noise and light and industrial activity. They'd tolerated it, adapted, maintained their community despite the intrusion. Then the predators came, and suddenly the territory wasn't tenable anymore. Too dangerous, too crowded with competing species. The mermaids had retreated, gone deeper, survived. And now they were waiting for someone, us or the predators, to leave so they could reclaim their home. I realized with sudden clarity, we were the problem. Both species, mermaids and predators, had been here before us and would be here after we left. We were the temporary intrusion, the invasive species, the ones who didn't belong. Everything I'd documented for 25 years, all the observations and recordings and understanding I'd built, it was all predicated on our presence here. On Platform 17, existing as a monitoring station in the middle of their world. What would happen if we left? I sat with that question for a long time, watching the spectrogram displays, listening to distant singing from creatures I'd spent a quarter of my life studying and protecting. At 3:17 a.m. on January 4th, yesterday morning, the singing stopped abruptly. One moment, faint vocalizations at the edge of detection. The next, silence. And then, rising from deeper water, approaching the rig. All 5 predators at once, moving fast, vocalizing in what sounded like coordination. They were hunting, and based on the direction and speed, they were hunting the mermaids. I grabbed my radio, about to call Marcus, about to warn someone, The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in after 3 seconds of total darkness. Just enough time for primal fear to spike through every person on the rig. The backup systems bathed the corridors in red, casting everything in shadows and bloodlight. Alarms shrieked, multiple systems failing simultaneously. I ran from my office toward operations, radio already at my mouth. "Marcus, what's happening?" Static, then his voice strained. "Power failure in modules C and D. Backup generators engaged, but something's wrong with the primary grid." "Thomas, are you monitoring acoustic?" "Yeah, I've got 5 large signatures converging on the rig, moving fast, coming from impact." The entire rig shuddered. Not violently, but noticeably, the way a ship feels when something massive passes close to the hull. Vibration through steel, transmitted up through the legs, felt in the bones more than heard. Another impact, stronger this time. Module B, southwest leg. I reached operations to find controlled chaos. Marcus was coordinating with engineering teams, trying to diagnose the power failure. Susan was on the satellite phone with Shore Command. 3 technicians were cycling through system diagnostics, trying to determine what had failed and why. "Structural integrity?" Susan was asking. "Holding," one of the engineers reported. "But we're registering repeated impacts against the legs. Something's hitting us." "The creatures?" "Has to be. Nothing else out here." Another impact. This time we heard it clearly. A resonant boom transmitted through the structure, felt through the deck plates. "They're ramming us," I said. "Testing the structure, or trying to what? Knock us down." Marcus looked at me. "That's not possible. This rig is designed to withstand wave impacts, ship collisions. A few animals can't." Impact, impact, impact. 3 in rapid succession, different locations. Northwest leg, northeast leg, central support. Coordinated. "Jesus," Marcus whispered. "They're working together." The implications were staggering. This wasn't random aggression or territorial display. This was coordinated, intentional behavior. They were testing the rig's structure systematically, striking different points, observing results. Intelligence. Not just animal cunning, but problem-solving, strategic thinking. "We need to drive them off," Susan said. "Noise, lights, something." "What worked before?" "Light seemed to bother them," I said, "but I don't know if." "Do it. All external floods, maximum intensity. Maybe sonic deterrents too, if we have them." Marcus moved to implement, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait. If we flood the area with light, we might see what's happening to the mermaids. They were out there, the predators were hunting them. I don't care about the fucking mermaids right now." Susan's voice was sharp, strained. "We have 164 people on this rig, and something is attacking us. The other creatures are not our priority." She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected. The predators had been hunting mermaids when they suddenly changed course and attacked the rig instead. Why? What had changed? External floods blazed to life, illuminating the water around Platform 17 in harsh white light. From operations, we had monitors showing feeds from dozens of external cameras. The displays lit up with movement. The predators were there, clearly visible, circling the rig. I'd seen them on monitors before, shadowy shapes barely visible in low light. Now, under full illumination, their true nature was undeniable. They looked like nightmares from humanity's evolutionary memory. Serpentine bodies covered in dark scales, 40 to 50 feet long, muscular and built for speed. Heads that were almost draconic. Elongated jaws filled with teeth, eyes positioned forward for binocular vision, suggesting active hunting rather than scavenging. Fin-like appendages that might have been vestigial limbs or specialized structures for steering. One of them rose partially out of the water, vertical like a sea serpent from medieval maps, and opened its jaws in what could only be described as a threat display. Even on the low-resolution security camera, the teeth were clearly visible, multiple rows, each one the size of a human hand. "Oh God," someone whispered. The creature dropped back into the water and immediately struck the northwest leg with its tail, a powerful sideways blow that registered on structural sensors as 47,000 pounds of force. Not enough to damage the leg. Not even close. Platform 17 was built to withstand North Sea storm conditions, wave impacts orders of magnitude stronger than this. But the psychological impact was profound. These creatures could strike with the force of a small car traveling at highway speed. "They can't hurt us," Susan said, voice firm, projecting confidence. "The rig is designed for this. They'll tire themselves out and leave." But I wasn't sure she believed it. The attacks continued for 20 minutes. The predators took turns, striking different legs, sometimes coordinating simultaneous impacts on opposite sides of the platform. They were testing us, learning, and they weren't tiring. Then abruptly they stopped. All 5 creatures descended, disappearing from the cameras, acoustic signatures fading as they moved away toward deeper water. Within 2 minutes, they were gone, leaving the rig intact but shaken. Silence in operations as we processed what had just happened. "Status report," Susan said finally. "All departments, check in." The reports came back over the next 10 minutes. No personnel injuries, no significant structural damage. Power restored to modules C and D. The failure had been a circuit breaker trip, possibly caused by the initial impact vibrations. One camera damaged on the southwest leg. Several sensor arrays offline, but not critical. Overall, we'd survived with minimal damage. But everyone knew we'd been lucky. "I'm recommending emergency evacuation," Marcus said. "Those things are intelligent, they're coordinating, and they just demonstrated they can attack the rig. We can't guarantee personnel safety if they come back." "Evacuation takes time," Susan countered. "We need helicopters, which means waiting for daylight and weather clearance. That's at least 4 hours. And if headquarters questions it, if they ask for justification, show them the footage, show them what just attacked us, and explain why we didn't report these creatures earlier, why we've been tracking them for weeks without notifying anyone. That's going to raise questions about Thomas's monitoring activities, which leads to questions about what else he's been monitoring." "I don't care," I snapped. "You're worried about liability and corporate exposure while there are people in danger. Those creatures are out there, they're intelligent, they're aggressive, and we don't know if they're going to come back." Susan met my eyes. "You're right. I'll contact headquarters, recommend immediate evacuation, deal with the aftermath later. But Thomas, when this is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about your 25 years of unauthorized research." I nodded. "Fair enough. I'd accept whatever consequences came, as long as people were safe." Susan moved to the satellite communication station to begin the evacuation request process. I returned to my acoustic monitoring station, pulling up the hydrophone feeds to track where the predators had gone. They'd retreated to approximately 1,400 feet depth beyond the continental shelf into the abyssal plain. The vocalizations I picked up sounded different now, less aggressive, more conversational, like they were communicating about what they'd learned, planning the next attack. I was about to report this to Marcus when I noticed something on a different hydrophone feed. The northwest array, positioned at the limit of my monitoring range. Vocalizations. Mermaid vocalizations. Close together, overlapping, at least 4 distinct voices. And they sounded distressed. I enhanced the audio, filtered background noise, and listened carefully. They were injured. I could hear it in the vocalizations. Pain sounds, distress calls. The predators must have caught some of them before attacking the rig. And now they were out there, hurt, vulnerable, maybe dying. I made a decision I knew was insane. "Marcus, I need to use the ROV." He looked up from a damage assessment report. What? "The Mermaids are injured. Northwest of here, about 2 miles out, at depth. I need to see if they need." "Thomas, we're in the middle of an evacuation scenario. I'm not authorizing ROV deployment for They helped drive those predators away from here. It was a lie, but a useful one. The attack stopped when the predators went after them instead. We owe them. We owe them nothing. There, Marcus stopped, glancing at the operations staff, listening to our conversation. He lowered his voice. They're not our responsibility. And even if they were, what are you going to do? Rescue them? Bring them on the rig? This is insane. He was right. It was insane. But I'd spent 25 years observing these creatures, documenting their lives, protecting their secret. I couldn't abandon them now. 5 minutes. Just let me check on them with the ROV. If they're okay, I'll come right back. If they're not, I trailed off, not sure what I'd do if they weren't okay. Marcus stared at me for a long moment. Then, 5 minutes. And Thomas? This is the last unauthorized thing you're doing on my watch. Clear. Clear. I ran to the ROV control station, a small room on the lower deck where we operated the remotely operated vehicle used for subsea equipment inspection. The ROV was currently docked in its launch bay, fully charged, ready for deployment. I powered it up, ran through the pre-launch checklist faster than recommended, and deployed into the water. The ROV's camera activated, showing the familiar view of dark water illuminated by LED arrays. I piloted it away from the rig, following the bearing toward where I detected the mermaid vocalizations. The ROV could operate to depths of 3,000 feet and had a range of about 3 miles. It moved slowly, top speed around 3 knots, but it was stable, controllable, and equipped with excellent cameras and lights. I pushed it to maximum speed, heading northwest, watching the depth gauge climb. 200 feet, 400 feet, 600 feet. The vocalizations were getting stronger on the audio feed, closer. At 840 feet, approximately 1.8 miles from the rig, I found them. 4 mermaids clustered together in open water, holding position with slow tail movements. Even through the ROV's camera, I could see they were injured. One had deep lacerations across her shoulder and arm, predator teeth. Another's tail was torn, scales missing, blood clouding the water. The other 2 were supporting them, keeping them stable, their own minor injuries visible. I recognized them. After 25 years, I could identify individuals. These were members of the core group that had lived near the rig for decades. Scar was there, the one who'd first tried to communicate with me. Pearl, the younger one I'd watched grow from adolescent to adult. 2 others whose names I never settled on, but whose faces and voices I knew. As the ROV approached, they turned toward it. Recognition in their expressions, or maybe just awareness that this machine belonged to the rig, to me. Scar made a vocalization. I heard it both through the ROV's audio and faintly through my headphones from the hydrophones. A question, maybe, or a plea. I had no way to help them. The ROV wasn't equipped for medical intervention. I couldn't bring them to the rig. Marcus was right about that. It would be a disaster. I couldn't dive to this depth myself. All I could do was watch. The injured one with the torn tail made a sound that I'd learned, over 25 years, meant pain. She was losing blood, struggling to maintain position. The others were supporting her, but they were exhausted, injured themselves. They were dying. I sat in the ROV control room, hands shaking, watching creatures I'd known for a quarter-century suffer and being completely powerless to help them. And then something else appeared on the camera. More mermaids. Approaching from deeper water, at least 6 of them, maybe more. Healthy, adult, larger than the injured ones. They surrounded the wounded group, taking over support, examining injuries with careful hands, producing vocalizations that sounded coordinating, medical, purposeful. Reinforcements. The rest of the community arriving to help their injured members. I watched as they organized. 2 of the healthy adults took over supporting the worst injured, keeping her upright and stable. Others examined the wounds, touching carefully, producing sounds that might have been diagnosis or treatment planning. One disappeared briefly and returned with something, plant matter, maybe, or coral, and began applying it to the larger wounds. They had medicine. They had medical knowledge. Of course they did. They were intelligent, social, cultural. Why wouldn't they have developed healing practices? The rescue operation took about 20 minutes. By the end, the injured mermaids were stable, secured between healthy adults who would support them during travel. The group prepared to move, arranging themselves in a protective formation. Before they left, Scar approached the ROV. She looked directly into the camera, and I felt seen across the distance in depth and medium. She raised her hand, that same gesture from 24 years ago. Acknowledgement. Gratitude. Goodbye. Then she turned and joined the others, and the entire group descended, heading toward deeper water beyond the ROV's visual range. I piloted the ROV back to the rig, feeling drained and relieved and sad all at once. They'd survived. They had community, medicine, support systems. They'd be okay, but they were leaving, abandoning territory they'd held for who knows how long, driven away by predators and rigs and humans who'd made their home uninhabitable. When I reached operations, Marcus was waiting with an expression I couldn't read. You find them. Yeah, they're injured, but they're being evacuated by others. They're leaving the area. Good. Then we can focus on our own evacuation. Susan got approval from headquarters. Helicopters are inbound. ETA in 90 minutes. We're pulling everyone off the rig until the situation stabilizes. What about the platform? The operations? Skeleton crew will remain. Essential personnel only, 12 people, all volunteers. Everyone else goes, including you. I started to protest, but Marcus cut me off. Not negotiable. You're going. You've been here 25 years without a real break. Time to get some distance. He was right, and I was exhausted. The past 2 weeks had drained something fundamental. Okay, I said. I'll go. The evacuation proceeded smoothly. Personnel assembled in groups, manifest checked, gear prepared. The helicopters arrived as promised, making multiple trips to ferry people to the mainland. I was scheduled on the third flight out, leaving at approximately 7:30 p.m. I never made it. At 7:17 p.m., the lights went out again. All of them this time, including emergency backups. Absolute darkness for nearly 10 seconds before generators kicked in. When the lights returned, 14 people were missing. The missing personnel were from Module D, the Eastern Living Quarters. All 14 had been in their rooms or common areas, preparing for evacuation, waiting for their flight assignment. The module hadn't been damaged. The doors hadn't been forced. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no indication of how they'd vanished. They were simply gone. Search teams swept every inch of the rig 3 times. Divers checked the water around the platform. The ROV surveyed underwater structures. Helicopters circled with spotlights, scanning the ocean surface. Nothing. 14 people had disappeared in 10 seconds of darkness. The theories came fast. Equipment malfunction, accidental overboard incident, electrical failure causing disorientation. But none of it made sense. 14 people, simultaneously, without trace. I knew what had happened. I'd known the moment the lights went out. The predators had taken them. Not directly. The creatures couldn't have entered the rig. But they'd done something during that darkness. Used their ability to produce infrasound. Maybe frequencies below human hearing that could induce fear, disorientation, paralysis. I documented their use of infrasound for hunting. They'd lured the personnel somehow, drawn them to an exit point, taken them into the water. Or something else had happened that I couldn't imagine. Some capability these creatures had that I'd never documented, never suspected. The evacuation turned into a crisis response. The rig was locked down. Everyone remaining was confined to central modules, doors secured. No one allowed near exterior areas. Shore Command dispatched emergency vessels. The Coast Guard was notified. Within 6 hours, Platform 17 was surrounded by ships, crawling with investigators, trying to understand what had happened. I gave my statement to 3 different authorities over the next 18 hours. I told them about the predators, about the acoustic monitoring, about the attacks on the rig. I did not mention mermaids. That secret, at least, I could still protect. But I had to tell someone the truth. So I'm writing this now, 11 days after the disappearances, after being evacuated on shore, after hours of debriefing and investigation and bureaucratic process. This is my complete testimony. Everything I know, everything I observed, everything I learned over 25 years of secret research. The mermaids were real. They lived beneath Platform 17 for at least 25 years, probably much longer. They were intelligent, social, cultural, a species that deserves recognition and protection. They communicated through complex vocalizations, had social structures, used tools, practiced medicine. They were people in every meaningful sense. They tried to warn us. For 2 months before the predators attacked, they produced warning calls. They tried to tell me something was wrong, that danger was coming. I didn't understand. I documented it, but I didn't act. The predators arrived in December. Massive marine reptiles, 40 to 50 feet long, intelligent and coordinated. They hunted in packs, used strategy, learned from observation. They drove the mermaids from their territory and claimed the area around the rig. On January 4th, they attacked Platform 17, tested the structure, learned its properties, demonstrated their ability to coordinate and problem solve. Then they took 14 people in a way I still don't fully understand. I don't know if those 14 are alive. I hope they are, though I have no rational reason to believe it. I don't know if the bodies will be recovered. I don't know if the predators are still out there, near the rig or elsewhere in the North Sea. Well, I do know. We invaded their ocean. We built a platform in waters that belonged to other species, drilled for resources, filled their world with noise and light and industrial waste. The mermaids tolerated us. The predators did not. This is the consequence of pushing into spaces we don't understand, assuming the ocean is empty except for resources we can extract. We don't know what lives in the deep waters. We don't know what intelligence exists in the places light doesn't reach. We don't know what we're disturbing. Platform 17 is being decommissioned. After 38 years of operation, Pelagic Energy has decided the facility is no longer viable, officially due to safety concerns following the disappearances, unofficially because insurance won't cover operations in the area anymore. The platform will be dismantled over the next 2 years, the legs cut below waterline, the structure removed, the ocean floor remediated. The mermaids' territory will be returned to them, if they want it, if they survived. I've been placed on administrative leave, pending investigation into my failure to report the predators earlier. I'll probably lose my job. I might face criminal negligence charges if the families of the missing press for prosecution. I accept that. I made choices that contributed to this outcome, but I don't regret protecting the mermaids. 25 years of secrecy gave them anonymity, safety, freedom. They remained undiscovered, unstudied, unexploited. That's worth something. I have 25 years of documentation, journals, recordings, videos, analysis. I've encrypted it, backed it up in multiple locations, prepared it for eventual release. Not now. The world isn't ready yet, and I won't betray them by revealing their existence while they're vulnerable. But someday, when enough time has passed, when the area is no longer active with human operations, when I'm confident disclosure won't lead to hunting or exploitation, I'll release everything. The scientific community will have access to my research. Humanity will know that we're not alone in the ocean, that intelligence exists in forms we didn't expect. Until then, I'll keep the secret. One last time, one final act of protection. This is my testimony. This is what I know. This is what happened beneath Platform 17 for 25 years, culminating in one terrible night when 14 people vanished and I lost everything I'd spent a quarter-century building. The singing has stopped. The mermaids are gone. The ocean keeps its secrets. And I'm left with recordings and memories and questions I'll never be able to answer. I'm 56 years old. I spent 25 years listening to something singing beneath the North Atlantic that shouldn't exist. And when the singing stopped, I realized too late that we were the intruders, the danger, the problem that needed solving. The ocean endures. The creatures endure. Humanity pushes forward, assuming dominance, until something pushes back. This is my warning. There are things in the deep waters we don't understand. Intelligence we haven't categorized. Communities we've never contacted. And when we invade their spaces, there are consequences. 14 men vanished because we didn't listen. Because I didn't speak up. Because we assumed the ocean was ours to exploit without consequence. I won't make that mistake again. This is Thomas Garrett's testimony, recorded January 15th, 2025, 11 days after the disappearances at Platform 17. This is the truth. This is what we've lost.